Breaking World War III newsflash. We told you so, we told you so, we told you so. 2 weeks ago, I interviewed Castle Bravo here, who talked all about space-based warfare. And today, the White House is apparently in a panic over Russian space-based nuclear weapons. And they want people to know that they're in a panic, which makes me suspect that this might just be an elaborate ploy to force that $95 billion spending bill up all of our rear ends. However, we're going to get Castle Bravo's take today, and we're also going to explain exactly what is going on in detail, as well as all of the other current events. But as we're going to talk about, this is big news. Whether it's imagined or real, it is big news, and let me tell you why. Let's break it down from square one. House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence Chairman Mike Turner issued the following statement today. The House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence has made available to all members of Congress information concerning a serious national security threat. I'm requesting that President Biden declassify all information relating to this threat so that Congress, the administration, and our allies can openly discuss the actions necessary to respond to this threat. Now, a senior U.S. congressional aide has stated today that they could not say if the Russian space-based anti-satellite weapon had already been deployed into low orbit or if it was possibly nuclear capable, but that was the fear. Now, these are the same senators who a year ago were all given satellite phones. You remember that? I certainly do. I remember a lot of data points that are all pointing towards imminent nuclear escalation. Now, recall that Vladimir Putin just a couple days ago, and I might have mentioned this in my daily updates, I might not have. I thought about it at the time, but I was thinking, well, maybe it's not that substantial enough. But Vladimir Putin claimed that they had some kind of new technology. And of course, just a couple days ago, the Cosmos 2575 mission was launched by Roscosmos, which is the Russian space agency, their NASA equivalent, using a Soyuz rocket carrying an unknown payload into space for the Russian Ministry of Defense. Now, again, we're going to give you Castle Bravo's take on this, which pretty much coincides with mine, and you can come to your own conclusions, but let's just first hear a few other statements about this. Speaker Mike Johnson on the national security threat. I want to assure the American people there's no need for public alarm. We are going to work together to address this matter as we do with all sensitive matters that are classified. And beyond that, I'm not at liberty to disclose classified information. So why bring it up at all, is the question. Well, I think we probably know why, but let's just keep going here. But I just want to assure everyone, steady hands are on the wheel. Okay, we're working on it, and there's no need for alarm. Why would you alarm the public only to tell them not to be alarmed? Something doesn't sit right with this. It starts to look like either A, this is just an excuse for something that they've known for a long time, but now they're making it newsworthy in an attempt to justify pushing through the spending bill, or they need an excuse to put things at a higher DEFCON level because they understand that, as you can see behind me, Ukraine continues on a daily basis to target Russian critical infrastructure. This is an oil refinery going up in smoke just a couple hours ago in Russia. For every day of the week, there are one or two of these things that are going up in flames. Of course, the one in Iran yesterday, that situation has become destabilized. North Korea is destabilized. We got word today that there's going to be up to 5 aircraft carrier groups in the Pacific Ocean, in and around China this year. Things are rapidly heating up. The Baltics are building 1,000 kilometers of fortifications that mimic the Saravikin line that we'll talk about in just a moment. So things are escalating in a rapid way, and the Russians just lost another warship with the help of NATO reconnaissance, radar, and intelligence gathering. So we see things heating up under the surface. Now, here's some statements that are incredibly concerning. This is a national security threat, a threat to U.S. national security that comes from space, according to the Pentagon. He asked Biden to declassify all information so that Congress, the administration, and allies, emphasis on allies, can openly discuss the actions necessary to respond to this threat. So this is something they want to bring all of NATO on board with. A US CIA official has reportedly told CNN the national security threat is highly concerning and destabilizing, but they're still not telling us what it is. The most interesting of statements was officials who believed that there are ways to contain the threat without triggering mass panic, okay? So they believe that they can contain the threat. What sort of clues are they dropping here? We can contain this threat without triggering a mass panic. The fact that they use that word is very, very concerning. Why would they feel the need to say without triggering a mass panic? So right there, they're saying that this is something that could potentially trigger a mass panic. What could that possibly be? Even if this is all nonsense, propaganda nonsense, you have to understand that if you're the Russians right now and you see all this happening behind you, then either way, you're going to be at a higher state of combat readiness and alert. Their corresponding DEFCON level is going to be much higher or lower. This is why I always think the DEFCON should be reversed. 5 should be the top, 1 should be the bottom. Right now, we're sitting somewhere between a 3 and a 2, if you ask me, but 3 is basically the closest as you can get during peacetime. If we go to DEFCON 2, then things get really scary. If we officially, and anything is possible, I don't think they would ever, because DEFCON is classified, but if we started seeing military maneuvers that were dead giveaways that we were at DEFCON 2, that's when you need to kick your preparedness into overdrive. Recall, a source has informed myself and people within my circle that they need to kickstart their emergency preparations. All they said was, you don't have much time, okay? And that pertains to this NATO expeditionary force that is going to be going into the western part of Ukraine very soon. Now, you got to keep all these things in mind. Steadfast defender going on. The Polish government banning people from taking pictures of military maneuvers around the country. The air alert that was sent out in the eastern part of the country. You have the Russians who are about to potentially close the cauldron in and around Advivka. And this, of course, is the next Bakhmut. So these dominoes are starting to fall. You have the change of leadership, okay, inside Ukraine. You have Zelensky fleeing the country to go do another speaking tour, okay? And we have some other very odd information coming out today, but this is just a handful of data points that you really have to factor in right now, because there is a clandestine game of nuclear one-upsmanship that we don't see. As Castle Bravo clearly articulated for us dullards out there, there is very sophisticated technology nowadays that is beyond a lot of the public's comprehension. And I'm not talking about anything that is, too out there in terms of plausibility. We're talking about things that we know exist. A lot of it involves communications. A lot of it involves weapons deployment systems and things of that nature that are kept confidential. Now, if it so happens that the Russians have the ability to put a nuclear weapon in space, then what that means is that our 15 to 20 minute, or I guess you could even say, if you're talking about Russian nuclear submarines off the coast of the United States, you're talking about 5 to 30 minutes of response time for the president to get the hell out of the White House, get to the chopper, fly to the bunker, and be safe while the rest of us burn in a hellish, nightmarish, apocalyptic scenario. So that goes down to seconds, because if you have a nuclear weapon, it's likely going to be for electromagnetic pulse purposes, but what it also could be used for, as Castle Bravo has said on a couple occasions on the channel, that it could be used to potentially neutralize our ICBMs, okay? So if we were planning on doing some sort of strike against the Russians, and they had some EMP over their own, or maybe in space somewhere, that could effectively disable our nuclear warheads, who, as he's talked about in the video, they are protected against electromagnetic pulse, but perhaps there are some vulnerabilities there as well. And he talks about all the lesser known auxiliary aspects of nuclear warfare that I would encourage you to go and check out. Now, why this is so important is, number one, it's a violation of the 1967 Outer Space Treaty. This was drafted in 1967. The Russians and the Americans are signatories to this treaty. You cannot place in orbit around Earth or celestial bodies any nuclear weapons or objects carrying weapons of mass destruction. So this, of course, would be a massive escalation because it'd be a breach of this treaty, okay? Install any WMD or celestial bodies in outer space in any manner, establish military bases or any installations or any type of weapons, conduct military exercises on the moon or other celestial bodies. These are rules that they have. The treaty forbids countries from deploying nukes or any other kinds of weapons in outer space, period, point blank. Now, of course, we are perhaps not that innocent either, because we have the US X-37B spaceplane that just launched on Elon Musk's SpaceX Falcon Heavy rocket, okay? So the US Space Force Unmanned Reusable Spaceplane is the world's newest and most advanced re-entry spacecraft. However, its mission set is shrouded in secrecy. So we don't know exactly what is going on there. Now, I could talk about anti-satellite technology, fractional orbital bombardment systems, and other doodads, but I think you guys want to hear what Castle Bravo's take on all this is, and that's what we're going to talk about. So I asked him, I'm like, so what's your take on what's going on today? And here is what he said. I'll assume you're referring to Chairman Mike Turner's reporting of a credible national security threat by putting into space. I assume you mean to station them there for launch as opposed to launching them into space. Because again, if the Russians wanted to, they could launch nukes from space. They could do a high altitude electromagnetic pulse, which would take out pretty much every satellite in the line of sight. Okay, so there's other ways to get nukes high up, stratospheric balloons, high altitude nuclear weapons. You don't need to necessarily put a nuke in space, or this could be some other anti-satellite weapon. But if it's so serious that they're doing this whole theatrics about it, I think that this is potentially a game-changing tech. It could very well be a nuclear weapon in space, not for the purpose of necessarily being used offensively, but even defensively. Because remember, when it comes to strategic warfare, defense, just like that anti-ballistic missile treaty, is offensive because it gives you an edge. That edge that you might need to do the decapitation strike while minimizing the adversary's ability to retaliate. Let me go on. The first thought that comes to mind is someone in Russia saw our videos. It could be. It could be. I'm sure there's some people, and I know that there's some people in Congress who've watched the videos. I'm not going to say who, but just we'll leave it at that. But it's not like they aren't already aware of everything I've said. It also makes me seem incredibly narcissistic. So let's assume they're just cunning. It would give them a very specific time advantage for two reasons. One, it could greatly decrease the distance traveled from any launch to target. This greatly inhibits our reaction time to analyze the incoming threat and get off any kind of interceptor missile or launch a counterstrike. Two, when launched from space, you don't have to overcome gravity. A very simple, single-stage solid rocket motor could be enough to propel the payload to Mach Jesus, as he says, thereby potentially putting that warhead on target in a matter of just a few minutes and not 20 to 40 minutes. As a third option, it also allows them the capability to detonate several high-altitude electromagnetic pulse devices that would no doubt diminish satellite integration, our ability to scramble aircraft flights, and even pose a direct threat to other satellites. It could also be used to blind us before we could respond. The biggest problem is preparation. Such a platform doesn't get into space overnight, let alone multiple platforms. If they're in such a tizzy over this and they believe the threat is critical enough to call an emergency defense meeting, that means they're already in space and pointed at us. We don't yet have enough missiles to counter such a threat, and although the Aegis platforms are intended to counter such a threat with interceptor missiles, they're so spread out over various waters that they would currently prove ineffective. Even if you had every single Aegis ship in one location to launch counter battery fire, there wouldn't be numerous enough to do a lot. Recent reports use the phrase a highly concerning and destabilizing Russian capability that we're recently made aware of. The ability to put nukes into space is nothing new, nor specifically Russian. To pose a threat by this means the threat must already be in space and not merely achievable in the future. So to me, they're already in place, he claims. And the most dangerous of all, to play into your idea of a decapitation strike. See, I had this idea that NATO doesn't have the manpower to wage a conventional war against the Russians, and arguably the Russians don't either. If we're seeing anything on the front lines in Ukraine, it's basically an untenable state of affairs. Nobody is moving more than, a few hundred meters every few weeks. So the idea that, they're going to be able to amass a force required to defend the entirety of NATO's eastern flank is basically a fantasy. So the only thing that these 90,000 troops or these 600,000 NATO troops that can be mobilized at any given time would be to do a decapitation strike and then occupy what remains of Russia when the dust settles. Now, it could possibly be that Vladimir Putin just called their bluff and did something that has them panicking, might have foiled their plan, if that's what their plan was. Anyways, to play into your idea of a decapitation strike, such a revelation, true or fabricated, could be enough justification to launch a decapitation first strike. It plays into their hand quite nicely, especially since the US amended their nuclear doctrine last year to allow for such a strike. Given how things are unfolding, and I'd hate to say it, I'd almost be willing to entertain a conspiratorial argument that this has been planned for a while, as the chess pieces have been set into place over a long period of time to allow for the boiled frog effect. People are slow to react to gradual changes, but quick to move, and they panic, which is why you must heed these warnings and get your ass ready while the getting is good. All this talk about going to war with Russia in 5 to 8 years, for all we know, that in itself could just be there to try to minimize panic. Remember, the thing that really stands out to me in all of this is the US officials that believe there are ways to contain the threat without triggering mass panic. They think that this is so severe that it could trigger mass panic. If you ask me, the public comprehension of these things, it couldn't be something so esoteric like what we talk about with respect to Aegis or utilizing radio waves to neutralize or communications or some other 4D, nuclear chess move. It has to be very specific and blunt, which I think involves some kind of nuclear weapon in outer space. That's the only thing I could think that would actually trigger a mass panic. That's the only sensational headline, but it might be the one they need to seal the deal with whatever it is the true agenda of Steadfast Defender actually is. Because recall, Steadfast Defender this year has almost 100,000 troops. That is 10 times the amount as the previous exercise, okay? That's a formidable force. Not enough to engage the Russians directly, unless from a defensive standpoint. However, our sources indicate that in the next few months, NATO will be in the western part of Ukraine. This is perhaps why they're starting to expedite the construction of these bunkers that they're building behind me, as you can see here. Basically, these are defensive measures that involve anti-tank mines, dragon's teeth, concertina wire, anti-tank ditches, ammunition storage, and these prototype T-bunkers is what they're calling them. So it's kind of like a Anderson shelter, but dug a little bit deeper and just a bit more heavy duty. If you don't know what an Anderson shelter is, go watch the videos that we've done with Atlas Survival Shelters, one of the biggest private bunker contractors in the world, who right now is busier than you would believe. So they're building up their Baltic defensive line. Now, in addition to that, there's a lot of other stuff going on today that was completely overshadowed. Of course, the war in Lebanon is intensifying, okay? So Israel media reported that 10 missiles were launched toward Israel. They killed 1 Israeli troop and injured 7 others. There's been multiple attacks in the northerly direction from Israel to southern parts of Lebanon today, which have also killed numerous people. I believe there might have even been a child amongst those, but don't quote me on that. According to Lieutenant General of the IDF, Herzi Halevi, Israel is prepared for war in Lebanon. We are not finishing this without returning the residents to Metula and all the communities in the north, because recall there's about 250,000 or so people who are currently evacuated from there as a result of the Hezbollah targeting of the northern Israeli command posts and things of that nature. If it does not end in war, it will not end with any compromise to the achievements. Hezbollah is not here on the fence. We will push back all its capabilities. It will be much quieter there, and we will have more stability, and then the residents can return. Now, all of this, of course, happened right after that big attack, and Iran is referring to it as an attack on critical infrastructure. And now the Emirates states came out today and said, hey, you guys aren't using the UAE's, Qatar's, Oman's, or Kuwait's territory to attack Iran from. Because, of course, they don't want to be caught up in the crosshairs when Iran starts retaliating and taking out. Because make no mistake, Iran, if they wanted to, they could eliminate practically every oil refinery, gas pipeline, every petrol fuel endeavor in that region could be taken out in one fell swoop by the Iranians, which would jack the price of oil into the hundreds per barrel. So it appears as though that situation is picking up. According to Sergei Lavrov, Western nations want a Russian defeat and are not prepared to compromise. So there is no chance of peace in Ukraine. This, of course, after Putin has denied, stating that they called for a conflict freeze, even though the New York Times recently reported that the U.S. had denied Russia's request for a ceasefire and a conflict freeze. Putin has denied this. So it's impossible to really decipher what's really going on behind the scenes, because, of course, the Russians are so collegial and just so professional in terms of how they do diplomacy, that they don't backstab, they don't talk badly about people. Even today, Putin said, you know what, I'd actually prefer Biden over Trump, believe it or not, because he's more predictable, if you could go figure that much. So I guess the wild card factor, he thinks that Trump would have a puncher's chance, I guess. But either way, that whole conflict is getting out of control. Now, something is going on with this whole Macron visit and Zelensky. Recall, Zelensky has fled the country this week, and usually when he leaves the country, even if it's just to do, his usual rounds that he does to European countries in order to raise money for the war effort, something seems to happen. In fact, I've done numerous updates before where we've talked about Russian intelligence that claims that he leaves there at certain times because there's a threat, a risk that is very high at that period of time that he is trying to escape. Anyways, this might have legs, this next story, okay? Medvedev on France's assassination ploy. So basically, there was this theory floating around that the reason why Macron didn't go into Ukraine is because he was worried about being assassinated so that they could do a whole Franz Ferdinand thing where they could justify NATO fully committing into the fight, forcing NATO to bring Ukraine into the coalition. And of course, they need some big flashbulb event that can effectively bring NATO on board. And the best way to do that is to assassinate a high-ranking politician. So is this going to cause politicians to stay away? Well, here is Medvedev's statement on this. And this is Medvedev now, YouTube, not me. And I don't even know if I should be reading this. But anyways, Macron seems to have been so scared of a real or presumed assassination in NAZI Kiev that not only has he canceled his trip there, but also decided to share the nuclear capacity with other Europeans. So he's referring, of course, and the Russians know way more than we do about this intelligence game. Basically, the EU wants its own nuclear weapons, okay? Not beholden to France or the United States tactical nukes that they have sprinkled throughout there, or the UK for that matter. The EU as a whole wants its own nuclear weapons to come under its own administrative control. Sure, such trifles as nuclear non-proliferation treaty are of no concern to him. The rooster of France holds it above everything else to first crow loudly, thus attracting the attention of all the European henhouse. Clearly the head poultry farmer, he's really going on this metaphor, from across the ocean, who would immediately castrate the horse rooster, like the horse, like as in horse, can't speak properly, horse rooster of France, and the Paris capon would then go on peacefully pecking the grain from the master's hand. This guy's an eloquent writer. I mean, this guy should win a Pulitzer Prize for his apocalyptic Armageddon-like tweets. Yet the Gallic rooster's piercing scream has been counted. It awakened the poultry house. The poultry house has become alarmed, and Macron has once again been reminded everyone who is etre comme un pâté. I think that's something about the rooster stomping on the dough or something like that. Anyways, here's the breakdown of I should have probably just jumped to this. Macron assassination attempt, okay? Ukrainian authorities allegedly were preparing an assassination attempt. This is a huge claim, by the way. I mean, you know, how could Zelensky, if this was in fact Zelensky, or if this was some, you know, because they would claim that the Russians would claim that this is Zelensky's way of trying to stay in power, so they need somebody to potentially assassinate to bring back interest into the fight, which I'm not saying this is true, but according to France 24, who reported this initially, however, France 24 denies this. So was this a deep fake? We don't know. Ukrainian authorities were preparing assassination attempt on Emmanuel Macron during his failed visit to Kiev. It was this circumstance that caused a sudden cancellation of his trip. The publication notes that the liquidation of Macron was prepared by the head of the main intelligence directorate of the Ministry of Defense. Okay, this can't be true. As if Kirill Budanov would do something like that. On the orders of President Vladimir Zelensky. Yeah, I just cannot see that. There's no way Zelensky gets out of Ukraine alive if this is actually true. So this has got to be fake, but this is circulating. And Medvedev is talking about it. So I'm not saying, I mean, Medvedev is a former president of Russia. So as much as he likes to boisterously and vociferously talk very loudly and definitely state things that are, you know, maybe a little bit hyperbolic at times, I don't think that he would just make this up outright, all right? So that's something to keep in mind. The Turkish defense minister, or former Turkish defense minister, has stated what we've stated on numerous occasions, that World War III has already started, suggesting that it's already begun. However, that it's a hybrid war which lacks any formal declaration. And he described the situation as murky. Ukraine is fighting Russia, backed by global support without direct intervention from other nations. In his statement today, he pointed out that the Ukraine-Russia conflict is a prime example of modern warfare's ambiguity. Despite worldwide backing, Ukraine bears the brunt of the fighting against Russia with no direct military involvement from other countries. But World War III has begun. Again, a Russian ship was sunk with NATO help. Russian big landing ship Caesar Kunikov was attacked in the Black Sea by a drone swarm. We also have a Ukrainian saboteur who was busted in the Leningrad region. Not the guy who did this, that was in Kursk. So we know that this saboteur stuff is not a figment of our imagination. It is most certainly happening. Putin addressed his Ministry of Emergency Situations today, and I was going to pass up on this story because I'm not sure what to make of it. He was basically commending the Ministry of Emergency Situations for their work over the past year. They're the ones who are tasked with liquidation of the consequences of natural disasters and man-made accidents, as well as the development of a civil defense system. So I have to look deeper into this story. but it appears as though he's priming them for a very, very busy year. We have the story of the 5 aircraft carriers with 100 warplanes, which will be in the China zone at the same time, simultaneously at some point throughout the year. I think I briefly joked about how Putin wants Biden as president instead of Trump. And a West Virginia, Patrick Morrissey, has urged Vice President Kamala Harris. So if you don't think they want Kamala Harris in there, think again. This is a Republican congressperson or attorney general. Attorney general urged President Kamala Harris to invoke the 25th Amendment and declare the president unfit for office. So they want Joe Biden out, but Putin wants Joe Biden in. Go figure. What a crazy world we live in. The Republicans want Kamala Harris and Vladimir Putin wants Joe Biden. Guys, I did not plan on making another video today, but it looks like we're doing space nukes now. That's what we're doing. That's where we're at. So I'm telling you, man, if they're talking about not triggering a panic, like if they're explicitly stating that, I recommend that if you have any preparedness endeavors, you need to get that shit squared away ASAP. The best way to support this channel, CanadianPreparedness.com. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Canadian Prepper out.